Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
This week's Parsha is Parshas Miketz, and it's Hanukkah, so we're going to do a class on Hanukkah tonight. So after we light the candles, there is a paragraph that we recite or we sing. Haneres Halalu. So Haneres Halalu means these candles, Anachnu Madlikim, we light, Ala Nisav Ala Nifla'os, for the miracles and the wonders, Al Teshuas V'ala Milchamos, for the salvation and for the wars, that you did for our forefathers in those days at this time. So here's the question. If I were to ask you, what do we light the candles for? Why do we light candles on Hanukkah? What is it there to commemorate? So we would say it's to commemorate the miracle of the menorah. There was only one flask of oil that was there. There was only one flask of oil enough for one night, and it burned for 8 nights. When clearly that's where we have 8 nights of Hanukkah. But it's interesting that, it says here we're lighting it for the miracles, wonders, salvation, and wars. So what are we saying here in this paragraph? What are you lighting the candles for? It says miracles, wonders, salvation, and war. Are we lighting the candle? So what do these lines mean? What it doesn't say which miracles, it says miracles and it says wars and salvation. It sounds like we're lighting the candles has to do with the war, the victory of the war. It doesn't explicitly say the miracle of the candles, but maybe that's the first words, Al Hanisim, for the miracles. If you think about it, when we say Al Hanisim in Shemona Esrei, or we say it in benching, any mention in there of the miracle of the candles?
Mm-mm.
There's not one mention of it. The whole focus of Al Hanisim is the fact that they try to make us, they try to take us away from Hashem and from His Torah, and Hashem helped us overcome them. Hashem had a great name. It mentions that afterwards they lit candles, but the whole focus is the war. There's really no mention of the miracle of the candles. So it's very interesting. Al Hanisim doesn't seem to be focused on the miracle of the candles. It's focused on the miracle of the war. Okay. Al Hanisim is for that. And lighting the candles is for both? Maybe. Meaning lighting candles is not just about remembering the miracle of the candles. It's also there to express our thanks to Hashem for the miracle of the war. And perhaps you can say that's because, the culmination after the war, the culmination of the war was the miracle of the menorah. After they were able to be victorious in war, took back the Beis HaMikdash, and they lit, the miracle of the menorah took place. So perhaps because the lighting of the menorah took place as a result of the war, it's also a way of remembering the victory, the miraculous victory of the war. The Maharal has a very interesting explanation. He explains like this. He explains that when the Hashmonaim fought their wars, and clearly they were outnumbered, and nonetheless, they won. So what do you think they thought to themselves? Wow, what a miracle that we won? Or, was there maybe a thought in their mind that we outmaneuvered them? Our guerrilla warfare may have won today. Based on what we spoke about Shabbos, Yehuda chopped off the general's head and got everybody panicky. There have been situations where battles have been won when one army was outnumbered by the other. So it's possible that they may have at least questioned or wondered, was the victory of the war a miracle or not? Now, it clearly wasn't a miracle with, supernatural miracles going on, right? It clearly would have been what we call a hidden miracle. But at the same time, what was it? Was the victory a miracle? Or, of course, we thank Hashem for helping us, but it wasn't necessarily a miracle. It was one of those situations where the few people outnumber the many, and they were able to outmaneuver somehow or another, defeat the great army, even though they were so small. Was it possible to think that perhaps it wasn't so miraculous? I think there was a movie, World War II propaganda movie about, I think it was called The Desert Fox, where basically the story goes that a few Americans outnumbered thousands of German troops. It was one of those movies that was meant to, pick things up for the people of the country. Could that have been real? Who knows? I don't remember all the things, but I think, at the end, you see hundreds of German soldiers marching, captured with a few American, tanks or whatever, a little bit around them. What happened here? So the Maharal says there could have been a question in their mind about what, by this war, was it a miraculous war? But then, when they won the war and they went to the Beis HaMikdash, and a miracle happened, the miracle of the menorah happened. That was clearly a miracle. Nothing to talk about. That already started opening up their minds, started making them think about what's been happening all around. Now that this great, obvious miracle has happened, it started making them think, what about everything else that led up to this? And they understood that the miracle of the menorah was meant to be a sign to them that everything was a miracle. That was the purpose of the miracle of the menorah. A lot of questions are asked. What's the purpose? What was the purpose of that miracle of the menorah? They could have lit the oil without it. They could have lit, in the situation they were in, the oil could be impure. They could have lit with impure oil. What exactly was the purpose of the miracle? According to the Maharal, the purpose of the miracle was for the Jewish people to start thinking about everything else that happened and get them to realize that everything was a miracle. Not only was the menorah miracle, but rather the miracle of the menorah was to let them realize that everything was a miracle. And therefore, in Al Hanisim, what are we recalling? We recall the miracle of the war, because that is really what the focus is. The miracle of the menorah was to help us understand the miracle of the war. That's what it was about. And therefore, the focus is thanking Hashem for the Yeshua, for the salvation. We're not thanking Hashem for the miracle of the menorah. We're thanking Hashem for the salvation, for being saved. The miracle of the menorah helped us realize what kind of a miracle that was. And therefore, when we say Haneres Halalu, if we say that we light the candles to remember the Milchamas, to remember the salvation, to remember the war, then there too, the idea is, when we light the candles, remembering the war. Because the candles were what opened us up to realize that the war and that the fact we're able to overcome the Greeks and take back the Beis HaMikdash, that itself was a miracle. So yes, when we light the menorah, we're clearly remembering the miracle of the menorah. But the goal of that miracle of the menorah was to really help us understand how the whole Yeshua, the whole salvation, was a miracle. And therefore, when we light the candles, we're remembering the miracle of the war, because that's what the candles were there for. It's also very interesting, on a different note, in Haneres Halalu, that when we say Haneres Halalu Madlikim, these candles that we light, Al Hanisa al Neflois, miracles and wonders, Al Teshuas Val Milchames, and for the salvations and for the wars. We're thanking Hashem for the wars. And if we're talking about the victory of the war, isn't that already included in the word Teshuah, salvation? Why are we saying we're lighting these candles for the wars? So Rabbi Zev Leff gives an explanation, and it's an explanation about many things, and that is that there are things in life that we wish they didn't come, but they come, they happen, and we're meant to grow from them. If we have grown from something difficult, then we have to thank Hashem for that difficulty, because that was the means by which we grew. Hashem sends us the difficulty and the challenge because he knows that's what we need. And if from that we have grown, if from that we have gained, then we don't look at it as, I wish I didn't have to go through this. A person actually has to find the way to say, I understand this was Hashem's message to me, and this was Hashem's means by making me grow. I have to thank him for it. I remember I had a Rebbe, Mendel Kaplan, Zatzal, and I just remember this little. He one time mentioned, again, it's it's a hard thing to grasp, or a difficult thing to grasp. And when I was only about 18, 19, it definitely was difficult to grasp. But he talked about a person who had a heart attack. And he made it through. And in Yiddish, he said, "Siz gewen kedai." Siz gewen kedai. You know what that means? It means it was worth it. Siz kedai, it was worth it. At the end of the day, he understood what he came out, what he gained from it. And he was able to say, of course it was difficult, but it was worth it. When we say that we light the candles for the wars, that's a recognition that we understand that the wars were a means. The wars were the means by which we showed our self-sacrifice, by which Hashem's name was sanctified. And if this became the means for something positive, this became a means for growth, this became a means to bring honor to Hashem, then it wasn't just random. It wasn't just, well, I wish it wouldn't have to be this way. If it was this way, it's because this is the way Hashem wanted it to be. And this became the means by which we were able to grow. We should become closer to Hashem. If that's what it was, then we have to thank Hashem for it. So that's it's a pretty strong idea. I want to conclude with a story that I mentioned last night by the Hanukkah party. You weren't there, but story I mentioned in the past. And I use this story to bring out the idea, like, what would a present-day Maccabee look like? Or a present-day Chashmonai, Or what did a Chashmonaim look like, right? So if you look at the, it's called the secular way of looking at the Maccabee, you see these big, muscular guys. Of course, they have a beard, but, they're big, muscular guys. They look like warriors. And maybe some of them were, because they clearly had to fight a war. A lot of them probably didn't look like such big soldiers, but they had to do what they had to do. And with Hashem's help, they succeeded. What would a present-day Chashmonai look like? So the present-day Chashmonai looks like, or would look like, a man named Yosef Mendelevich. Yosef Mendelevich was a Russian refusnik. If I'm not mistaken, you'll tell me if I'm getting this right. I think he was part of a plan to hijack a plane to take to Israel, and got busted, and they hauled him off to jail. And of course, he was put in solitary confinement. And I believe even before he was put into jail, his interest in Judaism was growing. And I remember when I was in Philadelphia Yeshiva, I don't know, I can't remember how old I was, but he was the big story. He was the big story coming out of Russia. And the story of him was that he was in jail and he was doing his best to keep Torah mitzvahs. No matter what they tried, no matter how they tried stopping him, he kept doing it. And I read a story about him that when he had first, my understanding of the story is when he would first land up in solitary confinement, that he figured, he was able to figure out when Hanukkah was going to come. And he wanted to do the mitzvah lighting the menorah, but how you light the menorah in a Russian prison? So he did what people at concentration camps did. To make wicks, took out threads from his clothing, put it together, and made what would be the wick. Okay, need a match to light it. Got a match from a guard. Was able to get a match. Guards have matches. Was able to get a match from a guard. Okay, we needed fuel. What was he going to use? And he was thinking and trying to figure out, what is he going to use? Where's he going to get the fuel from? Hanukkah was approaching. Wasn't happening. It was approaching the night of Hanukkah. He had no oil. And something hit him. And in his mind, he decided he's going to do what he can do. So he found a rock in his cell. He went over to the wall. And he carved into the wall with the rock a menorah. And he carved it in a way that the first candle of the menorah was in a crack, corresponded to a crack in the wall. And he took the wick and he put it into the crack. And he took the match, he lit it against the wall, and he lit his menorah. The light didn't last too long. But he did it. We know that he didn't fulfill the mitzvah. I don't know if he thought he was fulfilling the mitzvah, but at the same time, he was doing what he could do. They couldn't break him. As much as they were trying to break him, he wouldn't be broken. He was going to do the mitzvah no matter what, as what he could do. That is what a present-day Hashmonai would look like. The person who, although the odds in the situation are pushing against serving Hashem, that no matter what, he's going to do it. And I read that when he told this story over, a young girl asked him, what pushed him to keep mitzvahs in jail under such circumstances? And his seemingly very matter-of-fact answer was, can you tell a tree not to grow? That is what he understood. That is what the essence of a Jew is. An essence of a Jew is always growing closer to Hashem. And if you're not growing, then you're not living. The Chashmonaim were saying, as I mentioned on Shabbos, that as enlightened as the Greek life seems, as enlightened as it is, a life without Torah is not a life worth living. They were ready to go ahead and be Meiser Nefesh. Literally, they're ready to give up their lives. It was a situation we call Shas Hashmad. It was religious persecution. They were trying to uproot the Torah. In that situation, you have to be ready to give up your life in order to do a mitzvah, or in order to save the Jewish people, to bring them back to mitzvahs. But when you do that, what you're really proclaiming is that life without Torah is not worth living. No matter how good everything else seems, it's not worth living. And that's what Yosef Middlevich was saying. If you can't do a mitzvah, then you're not living. And that's the lesson of Hanukkah. The lesson of Hanukkah is that when we're Meiser Nefesh, when we show the Rebbeinu Shalom that we understand that life is not worth living without Torah mitzvahs, what does he do for us? He shows us a miracle. He shows us how much that means to him. That was the miracle of the menorah too. It was a way of showing the Jewish people that you went beyond. You went so far to be able to bring the Torah mitzvahs back. And what did that do? That brought about, Hashem responded with a miracle. A miracle to say, I accept what you're doing. You have brought me back, and I will stay with you. Wish you all very happy Hanukkah. Hanukkah Sameach. All the best.